Well, welcome back, everyone. Today is going to be a barn burner of a show because we're going to be talking about interim leadership, looking at an academy structure with this profession. And I love this, finding your leadership tribe. And wow, welcome Karin Sabey and Joan Brown to talk to us about this. This is a really heavy topic, which is picking up speed. And so I'm really excited to learn from the two of you so that we can kind of get a better understanding how we can be coping with leadership changes, which just seem to be everywhere. And so this is going to be a cool conversation. You know, it's also really cool in my personal tribe are our presenting sponsors, and they come to us every day in, day out, and they include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, JMT Consulting, our friends at Interim Executives Academy. This branding might look familiar to you. Third sector company, one of our valuable partners and thought leaderships, Joan Brown is representing them today. They're going through a really exciting branding change. And so Interim Executives Academy is their new name, still the same game as we like to say, but we want to make sure that we highlight them. Your part-time controller and fundraisers Friday round out our amazing members of the tribe. I'm Julia C. Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy, and I'm really excited to have this conversation. As we were talking in the green room with Joan Brown and Karin Sabey, interims are not coming back, but percolating to the top. And we're seeing more and more about this. So these two experts are going to be with us talking about this. Joan serves as the Chief Operations Officer at Interim Executives Academy. And Karin Sabey is the CEO of Sabey Consulting and really a great voice to have along this conversation. So Joan, let's back the bus up. Help us to understand what an interim profession is, what the interim profession is, and then we'll move on to Karin and have her kind of refine what maybe some of these standards of practice should be if they're not in existence.
Well, the interim profession is this idea that there should be people who are specifically trained to come into organizations during leadership transition time and make that time count. That this is something that people can be trained to do. It's not just a short version of a permanent CEO position. It is a very specialized field, and that we want people to be professionally trained to do it well.
It's okay, so that was beautifully spoken. I got to say, a lot harder to do than what you just described. Karin, across the trajectory of your career, is this picking up speed? Are people familiar with it? Like, what are you seeing in terms of how we understand this role so that we can define best practices?
Sure. I think that people, there are a lot of interim folks working. Mm-hmm. And I think that the general understanding of what an interim is really wildly different. Wow. And mostly people think interims are someone who holds a place, fills a seat filler in a gap for a short period of time, and that all they do is make sure that, the checks get signed and not any huge interruptions of services. And that's not at all what the Interim Academy teaches. It's not what I do as a professional interim. So I think we're at this exciting opportunity to really better define the profession and better define it as a standard of practice.
It's such an interesting thing because I feel like within the vocabulary of our workaday world, we can say, "Oh, interim. I know what that means. It's temporary." It's like we come to the table with like this definition that is so not really what it means in terms of the profession. And so it seems to me like we have to kind of, I don't know, re-educate or educate. And so I kind of want to get into this next question. And that is, when you think about the hiring boards, nonprofits in our country, the fiduciary responsibility of an elected board. Oftentimes they're the folks that hire. Okay, so do they understand this concept? Karin, I'll start with you.
No. Is the short answer. Almost no one understands the concept. I haven't met a board yet that really understood clearly. The lovely thing is about that, though, as someone who's doing the work, is I get to help, one, educate them about the opportunity. What I love about interim work is it is only opportunities in transition, and I'm really excited about the possibilities are endless. And so I have the ability to educate them about that, what that interim role is, what we can accomplish, and really set some clear parameters around what we don't do, so that they're not looking for things that are not that should be better on the settled leader.
It's interesting, Joan, a way to frame it up, what you do and what you don't do. That's fascinating to me. So what are some of the things that boards should understand that are the interim's not going to do?
We try to look at the things that are best left to the next leader. One of the important concepts that the Interim Executives Academy teaches, and that we think professional interims should adhere to as much as possible, is we're not candidates for that permanent job. We're not coming into audition for your next leadership role, which means that there are some things we know are better left. Strategic planning, we think, is better left to the next leader when they come in.
Interesting.
Significant staff changes. Sometimes there are necessary staff changes, but significant sort of overarching staff changes are best left to the next settled leader. So while we try to educate boards on the fact that this absolutely should be a profound and transformational time, by clarifying that we have great respect for the successor, the person that comes in after us, we can help have realistic shared expectations about what's going to happen during this period.
Okay, so Joan, you just sparked a question in my head, because you kind of painted a picture for me. And I'm thinking somebody who's retiring and leaving, and they're like, woohoo, yay team, and they're getting the cake and everything's great. Versus maybe the leader that's been shown the door and things aren't so great. And there are, to use Karin's word, there aren't so many senses of opportunity, right? So it seems to me like, you would have two completely different interim environments depending on that type of change. And I'm wondering if you see that, if you train for that, if that's common, because there's a pretty big difference there.
There is, although I think some of the opportunities are just the same. A long-term leader who's been there has established a culture, a way of doing things. It may be that a lot of what happens in that organization lives in their head. And it's hard when that long-term person leaves for everyone to adjust. We actually think that's a great reason to have an interim. The interim can serve as a bit of a palate cleanser, whether that was phenomenal leadership or not so great leadership. Let's get a fresh start. Let's take a breath before we try to decide who to hire next. And if a leader has been shown the door, as happens, there can be a lot of resentment. There can be polarization within a staff. There can be lots of feelings of uncertainty. Again, that's a great time to bring in an interim who doesn't really have a horse in the race, but can help the organization come to alignment around where it wants to go next. Both of those cases are great reasons to bring in an interim.
So Karin, this sounds like you got to be brave, and you got to be not afraid to tell the truth or bring up maybe unpleasant things to the board, because it seems to me like that interim is going to go in and almost do diagnostic work. Is that even the right word?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite tools is a SWOT analysis. It's something I do at every one of my gigs, and I really like pointing out what I think is going well, what I think could be better. And in fact, when I meet with staff, the two of the primary questions I ask them are, what do you think this organization is doing really well, and what do you think could be better? Because I think it's important to understand everyone thinks things could be better. No one's perfect, and even with a long-term leader who's been highly successful, doesn't mean that they've had. None of us have perfect skills in every realm of leadership. So there's always something that we haven't done quite as well as others. And then finding the interim who can come in and pick that up as a particular strength for them. That's where the real talent is. And I think that's something that Joan does especially well, is listen, as she's trying to place interims, is listen to what the board is saying is the need, and thinking of who's the person who fills that skill set, because not all of us are the right fit for the same gig.
Wow. You know what? I hadn't really thought of it that way. I think I've been so caught up in, you've got to train and you've got to build this profession and you have to educate everybody on this. I loved you use the word gig. Yeah, the fit I can see is really a magical thing, Joan, because if you get a board, usually people are more than on more than one board, right? So if you get a group and they have a really positive experience, that's just going to, I think, network out into a community, because those board members will go to other organizations that they serve or volunteer, maybe even in the private sector, and say, hey, this is a viable path.
And that's one of the reasons that we feel like education and standards are important.
Yeah.
So that when a board says to their colleagues or their business associates or others that serve in the nonprofit world, hey, we had a great experience with an interim, that's something you should think about as you're approaching this leadership transition. We want their next interim, who won't be the same person, we want them to have just a stellar an experience. And that happens with intentional professional interims. And generally, those are people external to the organization. So we think, the rising tide lifts all boats, that the better we each can be at our profession, that helps the profession grow as well.
Yeah. It's such an interesting thing. I mean, if you think about nonprofit management, we've been doing the same things. We've had the same structures. We haven't been really innovative on the management side, I think, until the pandemic, for a lot of organizations, pushed us into looking at things differently. And I don't know about the two of you, but I feel like there's so many folks that were right before the pandemic, man. They were ready to retire. They were aging out. They were exhausted. They had been cultivating that next gen leadership. It's a demographic shift. It's not just relegated to the nonprofit sector. And then, wow, so many had to stay on because of the pandemic. And now they're just leaving quickly in droves and saying, I stayed on an extra 5 years that I wasn't expecting, or 4 years, and now I'm out. And it's just such an interesting time to be thinking about some of these changes. And so I think this is the golden hour, if you will, for this concept. I really, really do. I want to get into the concept of methodology and how the two of you look at this and what that even means. Karin, when you work with an organization, what does this methodology concept look like to you?
So I've been a senior leader for a long time in a lot of different organizations, and I feel like I know how to be a settled senior leader. What I didn't know how to be was an interim leader. And they are different jobs entirely. There's some Venn diagram of what overlaps and what skills are important. But at the end of the day, they are actually different jobs. And I think it's important to have an intentional framework around how we do that work. And I look at the methodology as a tool bag, toolbox, toolkit, whatever you want to call it. And depending on what the environment is where I go in, I pull out different tools. So I have all these tools. I was trained on all these different tools. I know how to use them. And I use them as is appropriate for the setting that I go into.
Interesting. Now, I've got to believe that methodology might look different throughout the course of your time, right?
Mhm.
I
Yep.
mean, can you predefine that? Is there a
No.
structure that you follow, or is it more just like, whoa, holy moly, Monday is different than Thursday?
There's some for I think for most of us, and this is what third sector trained us on, the academy trained us on, but for most of us, there are some preliminary things that we do, sort of this set the stage. So I always do an initial SWOT analysis. I always meet with every single employee, time permitting. So there are just some things I do. I meet with each board member. So there's these standards that we do. And then otherwise, like Joan and I were talking about this last week, and I was saying, to me, it's like a big box of Legos. I can build a house or a spaceship or a flower, or I can build anything out of the box of Legos. So that's how I look at it, as the methodology. I can put it together in any way, depending on what does the organization need, a house or a spaceship or a plant. I can build any of those things with the Lego.
So Joan, it's so interesting to have Karin with us, because, you know, she's in the trenches and she's navigating this profession. And then you on the side of leadership, of the concept and training. Take us between the 2 points of what you do and what a professional does, and paint a picture of time, because the things that you both are talking about, this isn't a babysitting exercise, as Karin said, just somebody to sign the checks. But how long does this investigation and the implementation of this methodology actually take, or should it take? Should we plan for?
No, it's different depending on an organization's need. And we do some educating with boards around what to expect in an interim engagement. We do have boards that come to us and say, we just need somebody to be here until we get this permanent executive hired, maybe 3 months. And, you know, my first response is, well, when was the last time you went through an executive search? Not many of them are lasting only 3 months. But if you really want to get the value out of a professional interim like Karin, we think the average engagement, a great sort of litmus test, is that you allow 8 or 9 months for that. This doesn't happen overnight. It's not emergency care. It is coming in and doing the diagnostics, doing the SWOT analysis, talking with people, as Karin said, and then planning. How do we bring this organization into alignment? And it doesn't happen overnight. So we think 9 months is a great ideal time for an interim engagement.
So that's kind of like, I don't want to say a shock. It's logical and it makes sense. Does that 9 months include the active engagement of that interim in the process of hiring? Or are you just talking more about the operations of the organization, and that hiring is left to somebody else or another group? I mean, how do you see that playing in?
It's different in different organizations, but in most places, the interim does play a role in that permanent hire, and that would fit into that 9-10 months of engagement. That toward the end of that, they're helping the organization understand what they need because they've been doing the job. And honestly, 8 or 9 months of an interim gig gives a much better viewpoint of what that next CEO should do than most board members will ever have. So we do think the interim should be engaged in at least helping the organization determine what they need in their next leader.
One of the things I think I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
One of the most important things I think I do in the search process is I ensure that the staff are continually aware. Oftentimes when you have an executive, especially the CEO or ED search going on, it really only involves the board, and the board and the staff don't interact a lot. And so the staff can be, they can be spinning stories over here that are actually not accurate, and they're not making things up. They're just filling the void with little bits and pieces. So I do think that's a really important role that the interim can play, is to really have clear, transparent communication with the staff about what is going on, keeping them in the loop. I feel like my number one job is to ensure that the settled leader comes into a really calm environment wherever possible, and that most of the fires are at least tamped down, if not fully put out. And having the staff get more and more ramped up as the transition comes on is actually not helpful for that leader.
Okay, so then let me ask you this, because I'm thinking about this 8 or 9 months, depending on how a board is structured, that might only be a handful of board meetings, right? If they're meeting quarterly, or I mean, that's even more daunting, Joan, when I think about doing all of this work that Karen's talking about, being there on the grind day in and day out, yet having a limited amount of opportunity to work with that board. It's kind of frightening.
We really suggest that the interim and the board president or the president-elect or whoever that board contact is have a very close relationship during this interim period. It is almost impossible for an interim to do great work if they do not have a solid partner on the board, generally the board president. When that partnership works, we see really amazing things happen. But an interim cannot do this alone, and it can't be left to just board meetings. You're so right about that, Julia. It needs routine and frequent partnership between the interim and the board chair. Really great point.
Well, it kind of harkens back to what both of you said. There's an education quotient here. You're retraining, or not but you're training these leaders as to what the process is. I mean, because I've got to believe that the majority of the folks that you're working with have never dealt with this concept even. I mean, Karin, do you, and I love, again, I'm going to use your word, gigs. Do you come upon board and board leadership that's like, oh yeah, we know the process, or you having to spend time bringing them continuously up to speed?
I think the general answer is they don't know. I did work with one board where there actually was a person who had done interim leadership, although they did it a little bit differently than I do my practice. They were a little more of the seat filler. But otherwise, I generally don't come across boards that understand it. But once they get it, they are super fans of the concept. They can really see what a huge value add it is to the organization and to the settled leader, because we do a very intentional onboarding process of that settled leader that the board wouldn't otherwise be able to do. They don't have the knowledge or expertise to do that onboarding.
Joan, that's an interesting thing, because if nothing else, it almost seems like this function just allows for greater success for that next leader coming in, because so many mysteries, if they haven't been resolved, they've been at least revealed.
Yeah. And we measure success of interim leadership engagements in lots of ways, but one is, does the successor stay? Have we prepared the stage well enough so that they don't come in and end up serving as an unintentional interim because the problems are so great, they become discouraged and leave? We already know we're leaving as interims. Let us deal with some of these difficult cultural problems, workplace problems, financial issues. Let's get everyone into alignment. So when that next leader comes in, it's exciting and wonderful. And yes, they'll have challenges, but they don't feel so overwhelmed that they won't stay.
Right. Or that they've been sold a kind of a bill of goods.
Yeah.
Especially if you're relocating or you're navigating to something different. I mean, holy moly, that could just be a real can of worms. We don't have a lot of time left, and I'm really interested in finishing up with just the general concept of continuing education. And I want to speak more directly. We'll start with you, Karin, about how did you learn to do this? I mean, how do we keep learning, and what are you learning about, right? There's so many different things, from accounting to HR. How are you continuing to learn so that you're on top of things? I've got to believe, if nothing else, just the technology issue right now that we're all grappling with. So what does that look like to you?
Anytime someone asks me about the Academy and my experience with the Academy, I'm a walking infomercial for the Academy. I loved it. I loved my experience. I love that what it's given me in my career. And but the most valuable thing the Academy has given me is access to a group of other interims who I can go to for questions. And when I do an assignment through third sector, they offer me a peer advisor. So I have a regular meeting with someone who's done the work. And then I also have access to ongoing continuing education. And I think that's really important. I am a lifelong learner. I want to learn more about how to be better. I just want to do that for myself every day. And so I really appreciate any kind of continuing ed. And I think it's hugely valuable. It's something I encourage all my boards to do, my peers, my colleagues. I think you should grab a hold of it with both hands.
Mm-hmm. Joan, talk to us about this in the changing educational landscape. How do you feel about, in-person education, on-demand, asynchronous learning? Talk to us about some of the ways that we should be thinking about training. Because when you're busy and you're in the middle of it, I think sometimes it just seems overwhelming.
Well, I think the most important form of continuing education is the one we can use, right? And we're all in different places at different times. And, we may have ideals, but what can we actually incorporate into our life? At the Interim Executive Academy, we do online learning as a cohort, as a group, and our continuing education practices, for the most part, are online, again, with a cohort. Building community, as Karin said, is one of the most important things we can do. But we love in-person training as well. I just had the opportunity to be in Dayton, Ohio, and there's nothing like being in the room with people who are interested in what you're doing. But I think the important thing is that the world is changing quickly. And whatever our profession, especially in nonprofit leadership, we have to keep up with that because things are different. Things are different now than they were a year ago in our sector. Yeah. And continuing ed helps us be relevant and be helpful and be compassionate about what our colleagues and organizations are facing.
Yeah, it's a great way to frame it up because just to be effective with change and not to be ahead of it, but not to be behind it, where you're just 100% reactionary versus being able to be a little bit more strategic and not so fearful. I've got to believe, Karin, especially in the situation where you find yourself, the fear that you have to overcome for the teams, it's just got to be crippling.
I'm confident in me and my skills. So I don't approach anything from that standpoint, I guess. But are people there afraid? Absolutely. And I think that, what I feel like I have a particular talent in is taking that energy that is anxiety and converting it into momentum that will fuel the mission. That's where we come to the table and say, look, I know this is scary, but you're buzzing anyways. Let's all buzz in this direction. So I think that's really what we do is convert that energy because we are super comfortable in very ambiguous environments. Weirdly comfortable, perhaps some would say.
Joan, I think that it seems to me too, like, and we were talking about this in the green room off camera. The older you get, the more confident you get. You're not plagued by some of the things you were plagued with in your youth. The confidence and serenity of leadership goes far, right? I mean, you're going into an environment that there's an upheaval, the board's stressed out, staff is stressed out, the community with which you serve could be stressed out. It takes a lot of serenity and confidence, don't you think?
It does. And I think that we certainly walk into situations that are worse than anyone expected, worse than we knew, worse than the board knew. But I will tell you that my experience with the interims that I work with is that very often the board thinks it's worse than it is. And if we can bring some calm into the chaos, they've never been here before. They don't know what to do about a leadership transition. And so there's a lot of angst. And if we just say, look, we maybe haven't seen everything, but we've seen a lot. And I believe we can help you walk through this. That calm out of chaos is probably the best calling card for the interim profession that there could possibly be.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's a great way to end this conversation because, especially today, as we speak, the fear and the uncertainty with all these federal changes and leadership changes, we need calm leadership and we need thoughtful leadership and truth to power. And so, what a great way to end this conversation. Not how I thought it would go today, but that's the magic of live programming. Joan Brown, Chief Operations Officer, Interim Executives Academy. Remember, these are our friends over at Third Sector Company. They were one of our very first guests we had 6 years ago. Jeffrey Wilcox, the CEO. But now they are really rebranding, not changing their services, but really, I think, just redefining their work. And you can find them at interimexecutivesacademy.com. Karin Sabey, wow, this has been great to have you with us today because you're in the hot seat, my friend. And it's been really cool to learn about your work and how you navigate it. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. This was lovely.
It's been a lot of fun. Everybody, we have these amazing partners that allow us to have these conversations. And they include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, JMT, our friends over at Interim Executives Academy, Your Part-Time Controller, and Fundraisers Friday. As we end each and every episode, we leave with this message. And wow, we need to hear this message really clearly now. And it goes like this: to stay well so you can do well.